open our Bibles tonight to 2 Samuel chapter 17. Begin reading with verse 26. If you have your bulletin, you should already be there. So before I read the text, there are several names in this passage. And in pronouncing names in the Bible, there are often several ways to pronounce the same name. Even men who know Greek and Hebrew sometimes cannot agree on how exactly to pronounce certain names, especially when you get into a whole long chapter of so-and-so begat so-and-so. You can easily get lost in some of those pronunciations. Even in English, we can't agree on how to pronounce words. Is it potato or potato? Is it David or David? How many ways can you pronounce the city that is about 75 or 80 miles southwest of here? And if you go south, you have to go through this city. They have a very big, famous ball team. I don't know what it is, football, basketball, whatever. But how many ways have you heard that city pronounced? I've heard it Louisville, 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 and about a half a dozen other ways. We can't even agree on how to pronounce some names. So when we get to the Bible, if you don't read it the way I would have, if you don't pronounce it the way I would have, doesn't mean that you're wrong. So if I read these names and you think, oh, I would not have pronounced it that way, ask yourself if it's tomato or tomato, or Louisville or Louisville or Louisville. Ask yourself. So if I don't pronounce them the way you would, hopefully you will understood. Beginning with verse 26. So Israel and Absalom pitched in the land of Gilead. And it came to pass, when David was come to Mahanaim, that Shobai, the son of Nahash of Rabbah, of the children of Ammon, and Machir, the son of Ammiel of Lodebar, and Barzillai, the Gileadite of Rodanim. Now you see why I gave that introduction. Brought beds and basins and earthen vessels and wheat and barley and flour and parched corn and beans and lentils and parched pulse and honey and butter and sheep and cheese of kine for David and the people that were with him to eat. For they said, the people is hungry and weary and thirsty in the wilderness. Now, over the last 3 years, we have looked at a lot of Bible characters. I went back recently to see just how many Bible characters, and I started this series 3 years ago, so you can figure out we've covered a lot of characters. About a few months ago, I was just picking them out at random. And a few months ago, I found a website that lists every name in the Bible in alphabetical order. So that's the list I'm following. And in that list, we're just up to the B's. So it's going to be a while before we get down to some of the other characters. I have learned a lot from these characters. I've seen myself in some, and then I've seen myself in some. Hopefully, I've learned a lot. Hopefully, you have as well. When people today write a biography of their life, or someone else writes a biography of their life, most of the time they will tell you how great they were, what great accomplishments they made, how they overcame tremendous odds, and all the great things they've done. And the purpose is to paint this person in the best possible light that they can point them. One of the things that makes the Bible unique is it tells a character, then it tells their strengths, it tells their abilities, it tells their talents, it tells the good things, but then it also tells the bad things. So when you read the Bible, in the example of David, he's called the friend of God. And yet the Bible tells us he committed adultery, he committed murder, but he was still the friend of God. Abraham was the friend of God. David was the man after God's own heart. Abraham, one of the greatest patriarchs, lied about his wife, and lied twice about his wife. In an autobiography, they wouldn't tell you the bad things unless it would make their book sell better. But we see their strengths. We see their accomplishments. But the Bible also gives us their faults, their weaknesses. Because if they only gave good things, I couldn't identify with them. I would say, there's no way I could be an Elijah. There's no way I could ever obtain to David. And yet James tells us that Elijah was a man no different than any of us men here tonight. Elijah was a man of like passions. And yet we see that though he got discouraged, he begged to die, yet he also called fire down from heaven, shut the windows of heaven, raised the dead, and did many other great miracles. I like to study these people because you see how God used them, but you also see they were human. I can identify with the human side. And so it gives me hope that if I live like Elijah said, I am Elijah that stands, present tense, in the presence of God. He was a sinner, but God used him. We've looked at some men and some women that God blessed and used in miraculous ways. We've looked at some men and women who were nothing but low-down, good-for-nothing scoundrels. We've looked at murderers, adulterers, idolaters, and a host of others. Tonight, I want to introduce you to a man that I was thinking back this week. I don't remember ever in all of my years, I don't remember ever hearing a sermon about Barzillai. And yet, as I began reading him, there's a tremendous amount of information and applications that we can use and that we can apply. To understand the passage, we have to get a little bit of background. And I told you, when I give the background, I'm giving it for your knowledge so you can learn the Old Testament, so you can learn some of the events, but I'm also giving you the background so that you then can take the background, understand what's going on, why things happened like they did, and how God moved and worked. So to get a little background about what's going on, you remember Absalom. Hasn't been that long ago that we talked about Absalom. Absalom, by the time we get to chapter 17, Absalom has already succeeded in kicking his father off of the throne. Absalom led the rebellion. Absalom overthrew David. Absalom kicked David out of Jerusalem and set himself on David's throne and declared himself, I am the king. He had been very successful in that. As a result of the mutiny in the camp, David had to flee. Now, one of the things I pointed out about Absalom is he was very patient. Hopefully you all remember how he got in control. It took him years. He was patient, working with the people that came to the gate, and they would come to David for judgment. Absalom would stop them and say, "Why are you here?" "Well, I've got a problem. I've got a beef. I've got a situation, and I'm coming to David to solve it for me." "Oh, don't waste your time. My dad is too busy to take care of you. My dad is too busy to worry about your problems. My dad is too busy to even care about you." And the Bible said that over a period of several years, he gradually stole the heart of Israel. When he thought he had enough men or enough people that he could carry the majority, and I use my words carefully, when he thought, "I've got enough men that I can succeed in overthrowing David," he gathered his army and let it be known, "I'm coming to kill my dad and take over the kingdom." But he was very patient. You know, one of the things that aggravates me with Christians and conservatives, Christian or not, is we'll get all upset about something, you know, whether it be abortion or the George Soros district attorneys or, you know, some other situation. We'll get all upset and we'll make a big hoopla. And in a few weeks, we've forgotten it and we've just kind of gone on. The devil, once he gets his target, he never loses sight of his target. The overthrow of America, which we are almost experiencing. And I've actually read documentation showing how that back in the 1940s and 50s, the devil was already setting the stage, little by little. Now, I was born in the 50s, so I remember when we were talking about Mother Earth. You know, it was just, you know, it was no big deal. But we become ingrained in Mother Earth. Now we worship and serve the creature more than the Creator. Now we worship the earth more than we worship God. The whole thing of, you know, climate change, that whole hoax, and I say it's a hoax, that whole thing, the whole idea of we can't run a gas line because we might kill a spider somewhere. That whole thing started way back in the 40s and 50s, but Satan works very slow. Very slow. And it took him, 70, 80 years to get to where we are today. Christians, we get all excited, and then we calm down, but Satan just keeps marching slowly, inch by inch by inch. That's how Absalom got to the point of overthrowing his father's kingdom. Now, the overthrow itself happened so quickly, you know, and I've often wondered, why didn't David see signs of this? Well, because if he saw it, it was like, oh, that's my son. He doesn't mean anything or whatever. But because it happened so quickly, so suddenly, nobody had time to go back and pack their bags, pack their coolers, pack enough food. You know, oh, we're going on a journey. We need to pack enough food to last us a couple of weeks. They didn't have time. Here comes Absalom. We got to get out, grab what you can grab on your back, and let's get out. So they didn't have coolers packed full of food. When we traveled, especially when our kids were at home, when we traveled, we would have a suitcase of clothes and a cooler of food. Maybe a slight exaggeration, but not much. They didn't have time to pack anything. Absalom is marching into Jerusalem. Absalom has got his army ready to fight, ready to kill David. We got to get out, and we got to get out now. And so they just picked up and left. When we lived in Texas, there was a Category 5 hurricane. Yeah, they're hurricanes over here. Had a level 5 hurricane, not hurricane, heading directly straight for our city out in the Gulf of Mexico. I was working with the hospital, working with the police. I was at the police station when we were going over emergency evacuation and what would happen if it hit our city. You know, at a Category 5, what would it do to our city? And so we were involved in all of that. And then I decided, honey, maybe we should pack up and leave. So then it's like, what do we carry with us? You know, well, we want our wedding certificate. We want our kids' birth certificates. You know, and few things we wanted. We packed up the car. My wife got on the phone, started calling motels and hotels. She called 300 miles away in several directions. There was nothing. But the Israelites didn't have time. They didn't have a couple of days warning. All right, the Category 5 is, due to hit in 36 hours. They had minutes to clear town and get out. So they're running and fleeing. And then here comes Barzillai. Notice, he obviously was a very, very rich man. Chapter 17, verse 28, where we read, it said that he brought beds, he and those other men brought beds and basins and earthen vessels and wheat and barley and flour and parched corn and beans and lentils and parched pulse and honey and butter and sheep and cheese, because he knew the people were going to be hungry. Now, how many people did he feed? Chapter 18, verse 1, if you want to read over, David numbered the people that were with him and set captains of thousands, plural, and captains of hundreds, plural. So there were at least a bare minimum of 2,000 soldiers. And that's just the soldiers. If you count any wives or children, if you just count wives, you got 4,000 people, any children, plus there was a multitude of people that followed David that were not in the army. So there was a great multitude beside the 2,000 soldiers and the perhaps 2,000 wives, plus any children, and then this great multitude, and yet Barzillai and the other men brought enough food to feed 8,000 to 10,000 people. Let that soak in. How would you like to plan to feed that many people? How many of you have ever eaten at Golden Corral? I know you have. You put them out of business. Yeah, don't ever take him to a restaurant other than Golden Corral, because he's a growing boy and he loves to eat. You know how much food they prepare per day to feed a few hundred people? Multiply that by a few thousand people. And I'm sure they didn't have as many choices. They didn't have, 14 kinds of beans and 6 kinds of potatoes and all the other stuff. They had what we've got listed, but even with that, can you imagine cooking beans for 10,000 people? She makes the best white beans with cornbread and onions, but can you imagine cooking for 10,000 people? He was a very rich man. He and these other men. He was able to bring enough of the things listed to feed David and all of the people that were with him. And the people were hungry and weary and thirsty. And he brought enough food to feed them. He and the other men brought enough food to feed David and the people that were with them. Now, I enjoy eating, and I enjoy, got to be careful. I enjoy buying meals for other people. For, 10, 15 years, my wife Mike could tell you, I buy gift cards all the time. I probably have given away many hundreds of gift cards over the years. I see a policeman out somewhere, I'm going to stop, give him a gift card, here's lunch on me. I have given away, literally, not exaggerating, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of gift cards to policemen, firemen, and anyone else. I enjoy that. I delight in that. But that's one here, one there, one over there. Can you imagine giving gift cards for 10,000 people? And I don't give them big ones. I give them, most of them are $10. They can get a meal for that at fast food. He had to be a rich man, very rich man. In fact, in verses 28, 29, in chapter 19, verse 32, it said that he was, this is God, he was a very great man. He was also very old. It says that he was 80 years old. For those of you that don't know, that is 80 years old. How did Moses say that an average person would live? If a man lives 80, yea, if by chance he lives 80, 80 was the average age. And if a person made it to 80, they were extremely blessed. So he was blessed with age. God had blessed him in so many, many ways. He describes himself in chapter 19, verse 35. He said, I am this day 80 years old. And you young folks won't have a clue about the next part. Can I discern between good and evil? I'm not going to focus on that. Can thy servant taste what I eat or what I drink? One of the things, and we've got a couple of folk older than me, not a lot, But one of the things I've noticed, and you that are older than me, is things don't taste the same. I don't know how to explain it. Things just don't taste the same. So can I discern, but can thy servant taste what I eat or what I drink? Can I hear any more the voice of singing men and singing women? They didn't have hearing aids. As we get older, our hearing starts to go. That's why you see several of us wearing these little gadgets in our ear, because we can't hear like we used to. Wherefore then should thy servant be yet a burden unto my Lord the King? In other words, I am old. I'm 80 years old. Or he was, not me. He was 80 years old. He can't hear very good. He can't taste very good. He can't smell very good. And he doesn't have the strength that he once had. He said, and Solomon said it in the book of Proverbs, a grasshopper becomes a tremendous burden. As we age, we change. So he had gone through, he describes it. But when offered an opportunity at 80 years old, when offered an opportunity to serve God, he jumped on it. How old was Moses when he was called to preach? And a 0. 80 years old when God called him to preach. I think about Brother Brown over there in Turkey that we support. God called him to the mission field when he was 65 years young. I mean, most people are ready to retire at 65. He was pastoring a wonderful church there in Oklahoma, had a good, large church, had a financially sound church. He had everything, every reason to stay right here in America. But at age 65, when many people are quitting, at 65, he resigned his church and went to Thailand as a missionary. Did I say Turkey? Thailand as a missionary. Oh, I'm 60 years old. It's time for me to quit. Oh, I'm 70 years old. I'm too old to do anything. Barzillai was 80 years old, but when God opened up an opportunity to serve him, Barzillai took it. No hesitation. What are some lessons you and I can hopefully learn? Number one, adversity often brings out the best in people. For all of our faults, all of our sin, all of our problems in America, America is still the most giving country in the world when there is a catastrophe. How many of you remember the tornado that went through Piner several years ago? Most of you should. I was on search and rescue that night. I was there at the headquarters doing search and rescue, and we had probably, I don't know, maybe 100, 150 officers, EMS, paramedics, firemen, all of us there doing search and rescue throughout Piner and the surrounding areas. Several restaurants found out that many of us were at headquarters doing search and rescue, and within 30 minutes, we had not one, we had many restaurants bringing food. I think we had like 50 or 60 pizzas. We had several hundred McDonald's hamburgers. turned out it was Good Friday, so none, they were all fish, but, that restaurant, La Rose's, I think it was, and this one brought in food, that one brought in food. People were bringing clothes. People were giving us money. Here, people are going to need this, they're going to need that. People were giving and giving and giving in a time of disaster. And you and I have seen it many times. A flood, a tornado, a hurricane, something happens. And people give by the millions of dollars whenever there is a disaster. The overthrow by Absalom brought out Barzillai and other men who said, you know what? We've got a situation. They're going to need food. And all of these guys that were mentioned began to bring food. By the 10,000 people. I can't even imagine bringing that much food. Sometimes it takes a disaster for us to kick in and do what I'm going to show you the Bible says we should be doing all along. Lesson for us, number 2. It is not wrong to be rich. I have said that a gazillion times. Abraham was probably one of the richest men on earth at his time. Job was probably the richest man on earth in the time of Job. David was blessed of God, and David was very rich. Solomon was the wisest man, but he was also one of the richest men. He was so rich, they treated silver like gravel. Daniel was second in command. Under Nebuchadnezzar, David was the second in command, which means not only was he powerful, but he was probably very rich as well. So we could go on and on and on. There is nothing in the Bible that condemns being rich if God gives it to you. Now, you have to be careful because the devil can also give riches. The difference is God gives riches to be used to bless others. Satan gives riches for you to hoard and for you to, hold with all of your life. And as we'll see in a minute, Satan gives riches to get you to stop serving God. So, it's like, wow, I got a $40 an hour raise. Okay, where did it come from? Oh, it came from my boss. Now, I don't mean that. Did it come from God or did it come from Satan? Well, how do you know the difference? The difference is how you use it. Satan will give you riches to stop you. God will give you riches to bless you so that you can become a blessing unto others. And I'm going to, from now on down to the rest of my notes, are almost completely scriptures. I want you to see this is not what I say. This is what God says. And for the sake of time, I've got them written out. One of them, I've got several verses. You may turn over in Philippians chapter 4. I'll get there. But in Matthew chapter 6, this is what Jesus said. No man can serve two masters. It's not saying you can't be rich, but you can't serve two masters. Either he will hate the one and love the other, or else he will hold to the one and despise the other. You cannot, underline, you cannot serve God and mammon, which is the Greek word for money. He's not saying you can't have money. He's saying you can't let money become your master. You can't serve God and serve money. Nowhere is he saying you can't have it. He's simply saying you cannot let money, or Paul goes on later, you can't let anything become your master. 1 Timothy chapter 6. But they that will be rich, they will be rich. Whatever it takes, I'm going to be rich. They will be rich. They fall into temptation and a snare and into many foolish and hurtful lusts. It's not talking necessarily about lusting after women, but the Bible talks about many other lusts. Oh, and I'm not picking on you, brother, please. Understand. I've got a 16-foot boat. What I'd give for a 45 houseboat. 45-footer. I guess a houseboat would be bigger. Oh, man, I want that 60-foot houseboat. I'd give anything for that 60-foot houseboat. Oh, I just gotta have it. Well, you will fall into many hurtful, let me find it, foolish and hurtful lust. Now, I get advertisements all the time. And if I were a billionaire, I don't think I would buy most of the stuff. But I get one from a particular place at least once a month, a gold, 24-karat gold-plated rifle. What would you do with it? You couldn't shoot it. Well, you could, but it would ruin its value. I read that and think, you know what? I paid X dollars for my 22. It'll shoot just as well as that $5,000 gold-plated rifle. But when we become rich, we fall into many foolish lusts. What good is a gold-plated rifle? I mean, come on, many of you are hunters. What good is a gold-plated rifle other than to hang over your fireplace and say, I own a gold-plated rifle? Foolish, hurtful lust. Moving on. 1 Timothy chapter 6, verse 17. Paul gave young Timothy instructions. Charge them. He's not saying use your credit card. He's not saying charge them, with the credit card. That's not what he's saying. But he's saying you give them orders. You give them solid instructions. You tell them this is not an option. Charge them that are rich in this world that they be not high-minded. I think I told you I had a secretary in Texas, and she dressed as cheap as anybody you've ever seen. She resigned for several reasons. I hired my wife, but when she resigned, and actually we were getting ready to move, someone said to me, she and her husband are millionaires. And it's like, no wonder she complained about us paying so little per hour. It's like, no. She and her husband are not millionaires. Oh, yes, they are. You would have never guessed it. But we had another family same church, another family, that were also millionaires, and they wanted you to know it. I make more in a day than you do in a month. They let me know we pay for your salary. Our tithe pays your salary. What's the difference? Both millionaires. One was not high-minded. One was so high-minded, they were the ones that ultimately suggested I leave. Charge them that are rich, that they be not high-minded, nor trust in uncertain riches, but in the living God. Now, I don't raise your hand. If I put it in the form of a question, don't raise your hand. But how many of you have lost sleep over the years worrying about the stock market? They trust in uncertain riches. Years ago, my wife and I were close friends to a family that we were very good friends with. They were, I don't know, probably millionaires, probably. And we went over one day and we were visiting, and this was way back when the Great Depression, not the Great Depression, but you know, the stock market dropped like thousands of points. And they said something about, boy, the stock market is killing us. It's like, it isn't hurting me. You know, we lost over $100,000 in one day. And it's like, see, I don't trust in uncertain riches. The stock market goes up, the stock market goes down. If you put your trust in uncertain riches, you're going to be having ulcers and everything. Don't trust in uncertain riches, but in the living God who giveth us richly all things to enjoy. Charge them that are rich that they do good, that they be rich in good works, ready to distribute, willing to communicate. And I've explained that word. Communicate is not, hi, my name is Wilbert Ellis, what's your name? Hi, my name is Wilbert Ellis, it's not the communication he's talking about. He's talking about communicating, and you can read this, communicating with material things. He even said that if you've got two coats and someone needs one, give them one of yours. Somebody needs food, give them some of yours. Don't trust in money. Don't hoard money. It's not wrong to be rich, but don't let that control your life. Philippians 4:16. For even in Thessalonica ye sent once and again unto my necessity. They sent special offerings to the Apostle Paul. Not because I desire a gift. It's not that I want your money, but I desire fruit that may abound to your account. It's not that I want your money. It's I want you to be blessed by giving your money. I have all and abound. I am full, having received of Epaphroditus the things which were sent from you, an odor of a sweet smell, a sacrifice acceptable, well-pleasing unto God. But my God shall supply all your need according to his riches in glory by Christ Jesus. Several years ago, we had a pastor, preacher I know in Florida, who actually was up in this area visiting, and he stopped by the print shop to see everything we did, and we printed him some really beautiful, tracts and different things. And he said, "How much do I owe you?" And I said, "Nothing." He said, "Well, these things, if I had gone to a printer, they would have cost me hundreds and hundreds of dollars. They're not going to believe me if I go back and tell them this didn't cost me anything." He said, "What do I say to them?" And I said, "Tell them your father owns a print shop." He said, "I like that." He went back, told his church, "Where did you get all of this?" "Oh, it's no big deal. My father owns a print shop." He still used that. The last time I talked to him, he was still saying, "My father owns a print shop. I don't have to pay for it." God, it is an offering of a sweet smell. Bill will get into some of this later in Sunday school. A sacrifice acceptable, well-pleasing to God, and because you have given, my God will supply all of your need. That promise is only given to a church that is given sacrificially for the needs of preachers and missionaries. The reason God blesses people is to use it to please Him. I'm not saying you have to give everything away. I'm not saying you have to become a pauper. Jesus warned again, "Lay not up for yourselves treasures upon earth, where moth and rust doth corrupt, and where thieves break through and steal." They didn't have banks. They didn't have, all of these things. They literally would bury it, or put it up somewhere. And I don't know if you've ever left metal laying out, but it will rust. We got married. I worked for a company. And when we got married, my boss bought us a beautiful, solid silver platter. And it's like, my wife looked at me, "What are we going to do with this?" I said, "I don't know, but we'll find something for it. He's my boss. What are you going to do?" Well, we put it up in the cabinet for a while. Years later, we took it out. That thing was so tarnished. If that's your treasure, moths and rust will corrupt it. Thieves can break through and steal it. But he said, "Lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust doth corrupt, and where thieves do not break through or steal." In other words, store your treasures in heaven. You don't have to worry about inflation. Wife came home, a week or two ago from the grocery store, and it's like, "Is that all you bought? You know how much these 3 or 4 bags cost?" "What, 40, 50 bucks? "No." She said, "You need to go with me next time to the grocery store." Inflation. Things that used to cost 50 cents are now $2 or whatever they are. You don't have to worry about your treasures in heaven having to deal with inflation. In Luke chapter 12, Jesus tells the story of a rich man who said, "You know what? I've got so much money, I'm going to tear down my barns. I'm going to build bigger barns, and I'm going to retire, and I'll never have to work another day in my life." And God said, "Thou fool, this night shall thy soul be required of thee." Then whose shall these things be which thou hast provided? You work and 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 you save and you acquire, let's go big, you acquire $1 million. Who's going to get that when you die? I have seen parents leave, and I'm talking about more money than any of us have, and their kids turned out rotten. Or if you don't have a proper will, the state can actually take it over, and the state can decide who gets what, when, where, and how. God said, you're a fool. You're a fool. Because this night, you're going to die, and then what's going to happen to all of your money? You can't depend on money. You can't depend on money being there tomorrow. And I'm just going to tell you these. It isn't how much you give. Jesus told that in the parable of the widow. All of these rich people go by, and it's like they take out their $100 bills out of their wallet. They lay down their $100 bills and make sure everybody sees it. And this poor little old widow lady walked by and had 2 pennies. Not even quite 2 pennies. It was much less than that. And she cast in her 2 pennies. And Jesus stopped and said, this lady has given more than all of these rich people. It's not how much you give. Jesus said they've given out of the abundance of their riches. She gave everything she had. I'm not saying you have to do that. But Jesus taught us the lesson. It's, by the way, who gives more? A guy that makes $10,000 a week who gives 10%, and a guy that makes $100 a week and gives 10%. Who gives more? Anybody want to tackle that one? They both give 10%. They both give the same. Oh, but he's giving, $1,000 a week. He's giving 10%, hopefully more. Well, I don't have time to go into everything. But your tithe belongs to God. You don't get to pick and choose your tithe. You can't say, I'm going to give my tithe and I'm going to give it to Heritage Bank to pay off my mortgage. You didn't give your tithe. I'm going to give my tithe, but I'm going to designate, no. When you give your tithe to God, it belongs to God. You don't get to pick and choose your tithe. Now, if you want to give a special offering, it's like I really love Brother Brown over in Thailand. Out of my own pocket, not my tithe, out of my own pocket, I'm going to send $1,000 to Brother Brown. That's perfectly fine. That's fine. As long as he's a missionary, the church is approved. You can send $1,000 extra out of your own pocket, but your tithe is the Lord's money. Well, I'm going to designate my tithe. Then you've just taken it away from God. Because you said, God, I don't trust you. I'm going to decide where my tithe is going. I don't even trust the church. I'm going to decide. I want my tithe to go here. I want my tithe to go there. No, when you give your tithe, it's the Lord's, and He decides through His church where it goes. The purpose of riches, I promise, this is my last point. The purchase of riches is to serve God. Remember the Macedonians? They were taking up an offering for the church at Jerusalem. And Paul said they first gave themselves. When you give yourself to God, Everything else doesn't matter. The problem with me, and I'm sure probably many of you, is we're willing to give God a little bit, but I'm not going to give him myself. The Macedonians first gave themselves. Then they gave as God had prospered them to the church at Jerusalem. I repeat, there's nothing wrong with being rich as long as it doesn't become your master, as long as you don't serve it, and as long as you understand God has blessed me not to be high-minded, but to be a blessing to